We have been working our way through, we finished the Old Testament and moved into the New Testament. We're working on all four Gospels simultaneously, trying to find the common theme, the common story, how it moves, what is God's plan, how did God plan in the Old Testament get its fulfillment in the New Testament? How is it working out? How is God moving the pieces and the people into place so that his plan that he had even prior to creation is being fulfilled? That's what we've been doing. And we were in Luke, and I thought we were going to be in Luke again. I'm sorry for posting this on Facebook, but as I started researching, I went, wow, I skipped a whole event in Jesus' life in the story of the gospel. There's another story in John chapter 5 that I believe, and I believe this because many other teachers instruct me to believe this way, that it actually takes place first, and then we go back to Luke and Matthew and Mark. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we've been looking at Jesus' ministry in the northern part of Israel, in Galilee, in that upper area. And so far, for the most part, it's been very positive. Lots of crowds, lots of people flocking, miracles, demons being cast out. And the theme that we've seen is that Jesus is God. Who he is, his character. He had authority over demons. He had authority over the Word. He was the Word incarnate in the flesh. He spoke and preached with authority that nobody had ever seen before. He had complete authority and power over any sickness in any person at any time. It did not depend upon them. It did not depend on their faith. It did not depend upon their willingness to receive. If they were there and he chose, he healed, and it wasn't, okay, you got to go through 6 months of therapy. You got to have rehab. There was none of that. It was instantaneous, complete, full, done. Right? That's what we saw. But relatively, there's been almost no opposition so far. He has had a rather successful ministry. We would, in today's terms, we would say he was doing well. He's got a big following, and he's really popular for the most part. It's growing. All the signs that this is a successful ministry by today's modern standards. Thank you. We saw also why he came. What was his purpose? His purpose is in Luke. We saw that in Luke. His purpose was to what? Do you remember?
He came to deliver the prisoners, to give sight to blind, and
change their hearts.
Change their hearts.
And preach the word.
Yes. In Luke chapter 4, verse 18 and 19, we saw Jesus' purpose. This was his first big sermon that he gave. He gave it in his hometown of Nazareth. And he opened up to Isaiah chapter 61 and read, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor." That's the overarching mission, his purpose, to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That was his purpose. It remained his purpose for the entire time he was here. And we saw that. And he continued to do that. He wanted to preach. But again, there's been very little opposition. Other than that time in Nazareth when he said something they didn't like.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think we should not forget, though, that his ultimate purpose was to go to the cross.
Yes, but that is the plan that he came. Even though he when I said, I see what you're saying. You're right. I gotta rectify this.
Actually, the first he came to obey Father and to bring him glory through obedience was the cross.
and through his life of preaching the good news. He preached the good news and then delivered it. Let's put it that way. Okay? He preached the deliverance and the freedom of the oppressed and the prisoner, and then delivered the freedom. He made that happen himself. So he brought about what he preached. He didn't just preach and left us to our own devices. He preached it and then delivered it, which was through the cross and his resurrection. Yes, absolutely. So even the cross was part of the plan and is still part of what he is doing here. But the question is, if it's part of the plan, if the cross is part of the plan, where's the opposition? How is he going to get there? God has to work the cross into the events of man.
Well, opposition will be then those people that still belong to the world and will not receive him or will not believe in him as Messiah.
Well, that you should say something. Yes.
And get angry at him and want to kill him.
Well, yeah. See, but we haven't had that got angry and want to kill him, except for the Nazareths, a little bit, and that was a while ago. That was a while ago in his ministry. He's been in Galilee for a while now.
The thing that keeps popping into my mind is your message a couple of weeks ago, I think, where is Jesus God or is he a blasphemer?
Mm-hmm.
The religious people of the day accused him of blasphemy when he forgave someone's sins.
Yes.
And when you get down to it today, we have to choose whether we believe that Jesus is God.
Mm-hmm.
If he was not, then he was a blasphemer.
Right. That is that in our mind, I believe I can say is crystal clear. It is black and white, night and day. There is no, he's somewhere in between. No, we know that is not true. But opposition hasn't come yet. But today, it's going to hit. And we're going to see who initiates the opposition. Okay?
Okay.
Because today, Jesus, in our study today, Jesus is going to draw lines. And that's what we're going to see today. He actually does it in two places. He's going to do it first in Jerusalem. And that's John chapter 5. That is today's lesson. We're going to do this in two parts. Jesus is up north. He's going to go down to Jerusalem, and he's going to draw lines with the religious people there. Then he's going to come back to Galilee shortly thereafter, and he's going to draw lines with the religious people there. He is going to do this basically to ensure that every single part of Israel understands where that line is drawn, and he's going to wage war. So Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He does not say, I am one of many ways. There are many truths depending on how you want to interpret it yourself or how you experience it. And there's only one eternal life. There's only one source of true life. Now, why do you think he said, I am the way, the only way? This one's important.
Because he was.
But why is he the only way?
There's no other way to be saved.
Why is there no other way to be saved?
Because God sent him as only way. And that's God decided, and it's God's holy will that his son will be only way.
There's no more sacrifices for animals that
There's-
could
yeah.
take away
Okay,
sin.
okay. Now, very good, very good. We're getting so much closer to the reason why he is the only way.
Jesus was sinless.
There, that's it. That's the reason. And you all were hitting at it. Jesus is the way because Jesus is the only one who has been born man who is righteous. He was the only one who could stand in man's place and pay the penalty and stand in our place.
And it says he was the only one that there was no guile.
There isn't any guile. There was no sin. He was the perfect, spotless Lamb of God. And that's why he is the only way. And it is exclusive. I'm sorry that some people find that offensive, but there is not another way. There are not multiple ways to get to heaven.
That's right.
He is the only one who is righteous, therefore he's the only one who could pay that debt.
That's why he says it's a narrow door.
Exactly. There's another parable that he gave. The narrow door, the narrow gate. Wide is the gate to destruction. Yes, ma'am.
Just came to me, perhaps because I'm a mother, and perhaps some of you fathers out there, can you imagine being willing to give up your son for the sins of the world when there are other options?
Yeah? If there were other options, why
There
would I
are,
give
yes.
up my son?
That's right.
True. Anyway, all good stuff, but now let's think about this then. Going back to what you said, if there was any other way other than through the spotless, righteous sacrifice of Jesus Christ, God's Son, then God would not send his Son. He would not pay that price. So anything that seeks to establish itself as being righteous other than Jesus alone has no value or power to save. Well, it's interesting in this particular section. Jesus is choosing to make an issue of this exact thing, this exact difference between I can earn my way, I have my own righteousness, and he being the only way. Let's take a look at John chapter 5. And this really becomes a turning point in Jesus' ministry. John chapter 5, starting in verse 1. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which is Aramaic, or in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jews persecuted him. Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." For this reason, the Jews tried all the harder to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Okay, so Jesus was in Galilee. That's where he's been this time. This is so much time. And then there is a feast in Jerusalem. It doesn't say what kind. But there were 3 mandatory feasts Deuteronomy 16:16 says, 3 times in a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, at the feast of unleavened bread, and at the feast of weeks, and at the feast of booths, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. That's Deuteronomy 16:16. So this was part of the Mosaic law. They were the only 3 feasts of the year that every Hebrew male had to travel to Jerusalem to the temple to make sacrifice. So the first one, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, takes place around the same time as the Passover. So typically they were interchanged. Today you would just say you'd say the Passover. And that the Passover was during the first month of the Hebrew year. It's around the time that we celebrate Easter. Right around that time, March, April. The next one, what we would refer to in our day and age as Pentecost, which means 50 days, Penta 50 days after Passover, was also called the Feast of Weeks, and it was in about the 3rd month, May or June. And then the last one was the Feast of Tabernacles, or Feast of Booths, and that took place in the 7th month, around September or October. Now we know that when we first started the story of Jesus going up and doing his ministry and going up into Galilee, that it began around Passover, when he went into Jerusalem and knocked all of the people out, cleared out the temple, remember? So it's not, it's either a full year back to this one now, and he's going to another feast of Passover, or it may be this one here, which is, a little over half a year. So we don't know exactly how much time has passed in Galilee, but what I've read, many people think that it was another Passover, from Passover to Passover. So he travels to Jerusalem for this particular feast. Now, what happens when he gets there? Yeah, there was this invalid, right? There was an invalid, and how long had he been an invalid?
38 years.
38 years, long time. Yeah, right. You could say, it's for some of us, it's our entire life, right? Exactly. You will notice, I don't know if you caught it. It depends on which translation you're reading through. This particular translation, the NIV that I was reading through, skipped verse 4. It doesn't include it. And the reason why it doesn't include it is because in some of the older manuscripts, it's not there. And that's the one where it explains about how there was a superstition that if an angel came down and jiggled the water or rustled the water, they believed that the first one in the pool would be healed. Because that seems to have been added after as an explanation for this invalid's explanation to Jesus. That's not in some translations. It's been removed. Or it might appear in italics or in parentheses. But anyway, Jesus comes to the sheep gate, which is just outside the temple area, and he finds this man. And he's been an invalid for 38 years, and Jesus asks him a question. What was the question?
Do you want to get well?
Do you want to get well? Strange question, I think, to ask. Lots of interpretations of why Jesus would ask that. There is nothing that we can say absolutely is there, so we'll just take it as Jesus said it. We don't exactly know all the reasons why. We can guess, but we'll just keep on going to see what else is there. Perhaps it's not that important. Okay? But he says, do you want to get well? What is the man's reply?
I have no one to help me in the water.
Yes. He says, sir, I have no one to help me into the water. When the water is stirred, that's back to the idea of the angel, the idea of the superstitious, that if the angel moved the water, or the thinking of the day was if the angel moved the water, then you could jump in and you'd be healed. While he's trying to get in, somebody else always gets in first. Yes, ma'am.
Why didn't he just say yes? Jesus asked him,
Because
do you want to get well?
Well,
yes.
Well,
He
perhaps
doesn't know that Jesus is who he is.
that
He thinks he asking him why you're not healed yet, and he says, "But I cannot even get into water first." You know, his explanation to this man that asking him, "Would you like to be? You know, do you want to be healthy?"
it's a very interesting thought, and if you put the pieces together, I tend to align closer to what Larissa was saying. No, they don't. This man doesn't know who Jesus is. This man does not know, nor has he been taught that if you're looking at the Son of God. So somebody walks by, some man walks by. You've been sitting by this pool all this time, and somebody said, you know, I know why. The thought is I know why you're sitting here. You're sitting here so that when the water stirs, you can get in the water. You know, do you want to be healed? You've been here for 38 years. Do you want to be healed? And not knowing who Jesus is, he says, well, yes, I would love to be healed, but there's no one to pick me up and carry me and put me in the water. Somebody always gets there first. So perhaps that's the thinking of the man. What type of thinking is that? How would you describe that kind of thinking? So his deliverance is not God. His deliverance is this pool and the superstitious beliefs or religious beliefs behind it, right? And he has the Son of God right in front of him. That's strange.
But he doesn't know he's the Son of God.
You're right. He doesn't know he's the Son of God. But
all he knows is that he's a man walking by.
That's right. So what does Jesus, and that's important. I'm glad you said it because you just reminded me of something. Thank you. So, what does Jesus say? Oh, well, here, let me help you. Let me pick you up, and I'll just stand here and wait. And the minute the pool jiggles a little bit, I'll put you in. Is that what he says?
No.
No, and he doesn't say, well, I can heal you if you just trust me. No, he doesn't bother. He just says, get up.
But he comes and he says, just like Mama said, he doesn't say, well, I can heal you. Do you want to be healed? No, he just says, get up. It's not well, if you want to be healed, go ahead and stand up. It's not, if you would like to, pick up your mat and walk. These are all commands. They're imperatives. You have to. Get up. Pick up your mat. Walk. They're commands. Well, what happened? Verse 9.
At once the man was cured.
He picked up his mat and he walked.
Of course, at once, immediately. He didn't even hesitate. He just stood up. Now, I have you ever sat in one spot or sat on sitting on your leg or something for about 20, 30 minutes or whatever, and then try to stand up quickly? Oh, that's funny. You get all those tingling. This guy has been on his mat for 38 some odd years. And yet, without time for recuperation, he didn't have to, there's no, there's none of this stretching or anything that, he didn't have to, go through therapy. He immediately, at once, got up. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a little bit ahead of that because it's making me get goosebumps. When he was questioned, this cured man, and they said, how it is unlawful for you to carry your mat, and he didn't say, well, the Son of God told me.
He had no idea.
It's like he didn't even know who this miracle worker was. He didn't know when they asked him, who was it that told you this? He had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
He was just told, and he did it. Of course, who is going to argue with a command from God? If he says, do something, you will.
It's on this, it's on the same lines as Lazarus, come forth. What's he gonna do? Sit in the tomb and go, yeah, I'm kind of okay here. No, he will never do that. He came out of the grave. The dead obeyed the voice of God. At this point, you're thinking, wow, this is a pretty good story. Wow, praise God. He did an incredible miracle. But you know what? He's been doing incredible miracles this whole time. Mm-hmm. This is not a shocking or a surprising thing from Jesus, as we've read in the narrative. He's been healing anybody that came to the door. So why is this one here? Is this about a paralytic or about an invalid man that was an invalid for 38 years that Jesus cures? Is that what the Spirit of God put upon John's heart to write about and put this in the record?
Come to think of it, the man didn't seek Jesus for healing like the crowds did.
No, he didn't seek it. Do you know his name?
Nope.
No. Do you know his background?
Nope.
Only a little bit, but we'll deal with that later. Well, there has to be something else going on. What do you do this for?
I think you're leading up to the opposition.
Yes, the opposite. Very good, Peter. Good.
Yes.
Cameraman got it.
Yep, you're leading up
Yes.
to the opposition.
Because it's the very next line. This in the middle of verse 9. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. What was so special or sacred to the Jews about the Sabbath?
No
Couldn't
work.
do nothing on the Sabbath.
No work, no labor.
You don't work.
You don't work. It was.
couldn't carry anything.
You couldn't carry anything.
You could not walk far.
You could not walk far. What else?
It was only 300 or 400 other things. You couldn't.
300 or 400. Yeah. Well, I was reading. There are 12 volumes of restrictions for the Sabbath that were created after the fact. And I don't know how many of those were in effect in Jesus' day and age, but many of them were. And one rabbi reports that he studied one chapter or so, one volume, for like a year and a half. And he thinks he got that one down. And there's like 11 more. Yeah. These were, I'm curious, how many of these did God put in place?
No.
None.
Only
Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy.
remember the Sabbath.
Right. How were they to do that? What was the restriction? Could they not do?
Work.
It didn't work.
Work.
Yeah, they couldn't work.
They couldn't work. That's it. That why you added. There was a whole bunch of it, but yes, that was the only stipulation. The people were to take a rest, to take a day off. That was the only stipulation in the old Mosaic law. The Sabbath day was the ultimate moment of the week for the Pharisee, for the religious leader, for the truly religious Jew to show off just how righteous he was. So they would have prayers that they would stand up and pray on the special in front of everybody. They would do their fasts, and they would give their tithes, and they would do all these things. And one of the things that they did was they took what was supposed to be a day of rest, a day that God originally in the time had established in creation. God rested on the seventh day. Therefore, under Moses, we have the establishment of the Sabbath day, the day of rest. We are to take a break. We're to rest. But it was a day of rest, restoration, healing, restoration. And yet the Pharisees made it monstrously difficult. You could only walk so far, you could only do so much, you could pick up, but you couldn't put down, they made it into an absolute monstrous life. Saturdays, the Sabbath day, was a day of burden for most Jews. But if you could be a Jew and you could do all of it, boy, you were really holy. You were something awesome. Not, but in your own mind, in front of the crowds, you appeared to be righteous. You appeared to be very deeply spiritual.
Paul.
Yeah, Paul the Apostle. I was a Pharisee of Pharisees. Concerning the law, blameless. Right? And yet, what does he say? I consider it all dung.
Chief of sinners.
I'm the chief of sinners, yes.
Well, you know what I noticed in the story was that they're so busy looking at the rules and regulations that they don't even notice that God has done a work here. Because they should have seen this guy for 38 years. He's out the pool. All of a sudden he walks up. We'd noticed that if one of the people we knew suddenly just walked up and hadn't walked in 38 years, but they don't even really, this is not what their focus is on. They're like, what are you doing
Yep.
walking? Not like, oh, you're walking. Because their focus is only on those rules and regulations.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Let's go to verse 9 and we'll see that. Or verse 10. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat."
Yeah, that's exactly what Jennifer said.
Exactly. Do
They're
they
saying
see
God.
the mercy of God?
No.
The grace of God, the healing hand of God, the power of God over sickness and oppression and the sin? No. Just like you said. You broke the law.
Well, they advertise themselves as like the only ones who really understand and know God. Here it is. They missed him. They didn't even know he was there.
Exactly. Here are the leaders.
And that's back to what we we talk about that Jesus said, I came for the sick, not for the
Righteous.
righteous.
Yes.
So because they thought of themselves that they are righteous, they don't need salvation anymore. They are already in.
Right. Just to let you know, we mentioned this before when we were in John. When John uses the word Jews, he's not referring to all of Israel. He is referring to the Jews.
And
It's a derogatory term. These are people who oppressed and persecuted and came against Christ. Those he calls the Jews. Other people he would call children of Israel and things of that sort. But when it's the negative aspect, the religious leaders, all of those, he refers to them as Jews. The Jews came and did this. So here we know it's the religious leaders, and they choose law over mercy. But the man replies, he says in verse 11, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. What am I supposed to do? He said, pick up your mat and walk. So they asked him, who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk? Who is this person? Now this goes back to Mom's comment. Did he know who it was?
Mm-hmm.
Did he know, oh, it's the Son of God. It's that Jesus person. Did he know?
No, because he calls him man, just regular man. You know, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk.
Right. What does verse 13 say?
The man had no idea who
Who
it
he
was.
was.
Right, because Jesus had slipped away. He slipped away to the crowds. So is this about Jesus doing a miracle so that everybody could point to him and say, oh wow, he has the power to heal?
No.
No, because he wouldn't have slipped away.
He wouldn't have slipped away.
He would have been like, check this out.
Right. So he heals on the Sabbath and then tells the man, break
Break the law.
break
so
no,
someone
no,
knows-
break the Pharisees' law.
Yeah.
Break the man-made law. Break the self-righteous law. Break that one deliberately, and then he slips away.
There's a point to be made. Jesus was a Jew, right?
Yes, he was.
And he knew the Old Testament and the Old Covenant.
Yes, he did.
But in his ministry, he paid absolutely no attention to all those rules, and he broke them all, basically.
He
paid
broke.
no attention to them whatsoever.
He did break many of them.
They weren't his.
That I think is the point. By the time they get to Jesus's Jesus's era, Jesus's time on earth, when the Pharisees and the scribes and the Jewish leaders, Sadducees, came and said, the law says, understand that that's over 1,000 years of their manipulating and adding to and twisting and changing and messing with and making the law something that it never was.
Adjusting to themselves.
Adjusting to their own purpose.
They follow the traditions of their fathers and whatever they make up. Not
And then add it to them. Yes, exactly. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if it was after this or before this, but there was the question brought up, is it wrong to do good or evil on the Sabbath day? Even you, if your horse falls in a ditch,
Yeah.
you're going to help it up because that is good. It would be wrong to leave a wounded
Reaching to
animal.
suffer, yeah.
Exactly. So in verse 13, the man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd. And we're saying that this story is not about Jesus proving who he was, in the sense of, let me do a miracle and I'll prove to you that I am the Son of God. That wasn't this point. He slips away and lets it brew. Lets it stir up whatever it's going to stir up. And we also talked about the fact that the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the Jews of that day, would rather have had strict adherence to a man-made regulation and law that wasn't a part of God's law initially, wasn't in part of his intent for the law and the Sabbath. They would rather have that than mercy, or to acknowledge God's hand and God's power in this man's life. But let's keep going, because verse 14 tells that Jesus actually did come back and see this man. Verse 14, who could read verse 14?
Later Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you."
That is a
That's a
very,
strange one.
very strange comment. He says, stop sinning or something worse may happen. Now, depending on how you take that, how would you take that? How do you take that?
Or you stop to sin and will have eternal life with me, or something worse, you will go to hell, happens to you if you don't stop to sin.
Well,
I think it is, this guy's a pretty bad sinner, and he knows that this guy's going to probably keep going at it.
Well, how old? Those are all wonderful ideas. How old was this man?
Nobody knows.
What?
Oh, you mean this?
How old was the invalid?
Nobody knows.
You don't know, do
He
you?
was just waiting there.
He was-
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought from the verse, that's why
No, there's
He had been this
nothing.
way for 30 years.
Okay,
Of your
that's
heart,
right.
or like maybe I saw you and it's like,
Maybe that's what you I did not see it at all. I thought he
No,
was from birth.
he was an invalid for 38 years.
That's
It
Right.
didn't say what happened prior to that.
Maybe that's what made him.
because I know.
This is an interesting thought. If this man was in his 60s, then that meant that what could have brought on the invalid, the condition, his sickness, took place 38 years prior to that, when he was actually a grown man. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it was something that continued. He could have been caught up in something, and as a result, he contracted some disease or something, and it paralyzed him. It made him an invalid. And for 38 years, that's how he lived. It doesn't necessarily mean that he continued doing whatever it was that he did. It could simply be the consequence of his the sin that whatever he was in before this condition came upon him. We know people that have problems. I know people. You spend 28, 38 years as an alcoholic, I guarantee you there's going to be problems even when you stop using alcohol. You know, or smoker, yes, or
Well,
a drug user.
That's when the problem started, is when he stopped.
Right.
Seems pretty much.
How about the person who's caught up in something immoral? And due to the children in the room, I won't go into, let's say it's something on the computer. 10, 15 years they're caught up in this addiction, quote unquote. And now they're 30, 40 years old, and they really wish they could get married, but they just can't seem to find the right woman. Because she doesn't quite measure up to what is pictured and engraved in the back of that man's mind. From all those years of watching all that airbrushed debauchery stuff. And he cannot have a relationship anymore. Or maybe he does. Maybe he does actually get married. But he's not with her intimately alone. He brings all those images with him to her and shares that time. Those things do happen. Sin, we were talking about this last night. Sin is never isolated. It never is all by itself. It always has consequences. It always branches out. People will always suffer from it. Don't ever think that you can sin and it's just about you. So whatever happened with this guy, Jesus says, stop sinning. Now, the next line may give us a hint on what this sin was. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit like he wants to betray Jesus, or he does not care for who healed him. It's like almost Judas, Judas' brother or so. To me, it sounds like this.
Like he's telling on him.
Yeah.
Now,
I don't see it that way. I think he just found out who Jesus was.
Does he know?
well, he found out who Jesus was, then he goes back to the religious leader and says, oh, that person that you were asking about, his name's Jesus. So my question is, why did he go back? Why would he go tell the Pharisees?
Maybe he was trying to get away from trouble that involved him carrying that mat around.
Really?
So I carried the mat, but it's okay because I'm tell you who this guy was. I don't know.
Well, I don't toss that away because that's a very good one. We actually see another incident of that later in John with the guy who was blind. Remember the guy who was blind and Jesus healed him, and they brought the blind guy before the religious leaders and who healed you and how did this happen, etc., and didn't get an answer, so they brought in his parents. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what did his parents say?
He's of age.
He's of age. Ask him. And why did they say that?
Because they don't want to get
They
accused
didn't want
of.
to be in it.
It says why.
They don't want to be accused of telling on or giving them up. Or, I don't know how to word it.
They
They didn't
didn't.
want responsibility
Yeah.
for themselves.
They were afraid that they would be thrown out of the synagogue.
Yeah.
That they would be thrown out of the temple. They loved their religious system more than anything else. It was more important. Let him take, he's of age, he can take whatever is going to come to him, but we're, I just don't know, we don't know. So that they could stay in right standing with the religious system of the time. Why would this guy go back to the religious leaders?
One of the possible answers is in verse 12. They ask him, who is the fellow who told you to pick up the mat and walk?
Right. But why later, after he finds out who it was, would he go back and tell them when he knows that their issue was, this guy told you to break the law? So what is the result? What has happened? Verse 16, 17, and 18. Who can read those three verses? 16, 17, and 18.
I will.
Okay.
So, because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jews persecuted him. Jesus said to them, my Father is always at work to this very day, and I too am working. For this reason, the Jews tried all the harder to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God.
Okay. Wow.
And that made him even more madder.
So what was the result?
The Jews were jealous and wanted to kill him for breaking their law.
For breaking their law, breaking their Sabbath. What did that mean? If Jesus, this man who's going around doing all these miracles, I mean mighty, mighty miracles like no one has ever seen before, has these massive crowds following him. If this guy says, break the establishment's laws, break their rules, their man-made rules, what is he attacking?
Their self-righteousness.
Yeah. He's getting right to the very, very heart of the religious Jew and attacking them at their very core.
Their positions were more important than anything else, the positions that they held in the community.
Right.
That was more important than anything else.
You notice just to go back, and why I say it is an issue of being attacked. They felt their religious system, their way of life, their religious way of life was under attack. When they asked the man the question, do they ask the man, who is this man who healed you?
Good point.
No. They don't ask him about his healing. They ask him, who told you to pick up your mat?
We told you to break our law.
Well, that's what I was saying. They didn't care about
Right.
God's work, what was going on, or it was only about who told you to not do
Well,
what we
wasn't
told
it
you
wrong
to
to
do.
heal on the Sabbath though, too?
No, it wasn't wrong to heal on the Sabbath. That was part of their man-made rule that they put on the Sabbath.
So then, the question is, why would Jesus bother with the second half of the command? Why didn't he say, get up and leave it at that? The guy could get up and not break the Sabbath, and nobody would have ever made a big issue. But Jesus deliberately told him to do something that the religious group would not like.
Right. And it had nothing to do really with the breaking of one little itty bitty rule. They knew he was a threat to their religious way of life, to their self-righteousness, that their status was being questioned, and they wanted him dead. But what is that in verse 17? Very strange way he said what Jesus says. Jesus says, my Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. What does that have to do with the Sabbath?
You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath.
I'm trying to fulfill what's to come.
Trying to
I think
no.
he is
No?
referring to the salvation work. That we're constant. My father and I, we're working at this, at salvation of each. You know,
Salvation, fulfilling God's work, maybe. I think Mom is closer. This has to be something every day. Who took a rest on the seventh day of creation?
God.
God.
6 days he created, on the seventh day he rested. Oh, well, thank goodness, because he was so tired.
Yeah, I
Oh,
don't
no.
think so.
Right?
No,
Nope.
no.
God, after putting everything into motion, let it all go and sat back to catch his breath again. Is that
No.
what that Sabbath is about?
God doesn't get tired.
Never.
Did God at any time throughout all the Sabbaths of history ever stop working?
No.
Did he ever stop
He's still working
providing?
today. He's still
Did he ever stop healing? Did he ever stop everything from growing? Okay? Plants freeze. You gotta stop. Shh. No. Nothing. God has never stopped. He sustains everything.
Except for the fig tree.
That he cursed and said no.
Well, there's a plan.
But even that, he controlled.
Yeah.
He holds and sustains all of creation. If he were to let go of creation, if he were to literally
only for one day.
Even for one
Everything
fraction
would
of a
get
moment,
hard.
let go of everything, we would poof, we'd implode, explode, or whatever it is that would happen to us.
We don't want him to have a bad day.
Yeah. What? So we need to give him a vacation? No. And that's what Jesus is saying here. My Father is always at work to this very day. Through all those Sabbaths that you have said stop working, my Father has continued to do what my Father has done. He has continued to hold all things together.
Because you guys keep sinning, and he's working on the way to the cure all, which is Jesus.
Well, just breathe. Let God take a day off and see how many people take their next breath.
Yeah.
Or how molecules and atoms hold together if God were just to let go.
That's scripture.
That's all been put in the hands of Jesus now, though.
That is absolutely true, because there's a verse that says that God has placed all things into his hand, and that creation whole is held together by Christ.
But it still doesn't say he stopped working.
Because he never did.
Yeah.
He does not stop working. And since God Father has not stopped working on Sabbaths, all those Sabbaths, but still continues to do what is good on those Sabbaths, I too work. Now, understand this is constructed so it is, I have always been and continue doing. So he's not only saying, I am like the Father, but I have been working as long as the Father.
Yeah, TOO.
So what resulted? For this reason, in verse 18, for this reason the Jews tried all the harder to kill him, not only not only was he breaking the Sabbath, and you can put in quotes, in their mind, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God.
Which he is.
Which he is,
But not in their eyes.
but not in their eyes. And
And
this is where we begin the antagonism, the road towards the cross. Christ has made a very distinctive gesture. He has done something that has deliberately set off the powers that be, the religious Jews of the time.
His time has come.
And he's now setting this in motion. The cross is now working towards it more aggressively and more aggressively. And as we go through the Gospels, you'll see that as Jesus works and the story progresses, that black and white, good, evil, on the side of Christ, off the side of Christ, or against Christ, that antagonism is going to become a lot clearer. Up to this point, it's been, some people have come and they've gone, and some have believed and some have not, but it's been pretty mellow so far. Jesus is, the time's coming, and now I'm drawing a line. Here's the line. Now, this is just in the southern part. This is in Jerusalem area. He's not finished drawing lines, because next time we get together, we're going to go back to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because shortly after this, when he returns to Galilee, he's going to do the exact same thing. Exact same thing. It's a definitive line. He is going to create or bring about this antagonism. He's going to reveal that he is not going to play. He's not going to compromise. He's not going to fall in line with what they want. But he has an agenda. He has a purpose. Now, going back to what you said to wrap it up tonight. How would you sum this up? If you said this would be a lesson for us today, how would you wrap it up?
learn his ways, keep his commandments at all cost.
Okay? Learn his ways, keep his commandments, all costs. What else?
The thing that sticks out to me most about all this is get over yourself. It's not about you, it's about God.
Get over yourself. It's not about you. It's about God. That's an interesting. I don't know that I would say it that way, but you said it perfectly. That's wonderful. What do you mean if you had to to express that to somebody or explain that to somebody, how would you explain that it's not about you, get over yourself, it's about God? Well, we can be very puffed up in ourselves. That's true. We can also make, and this is where I think doing part of this Bible study with you has helped me in my growth. And that is, when I go through these Bible studies, when I go through these stories that I grew up with, I mean, I know these stories. You know these stories. These are common stories. You've had them read to you, preached at you, taught to you many, many times. When you hear them, your immediate or my immediate focus is, well, what can I get out of it? Look at what Jesus came to do for me. He's on the cross, trampled on the ground. He thought of me above all else. So the song goes. Really? The Son of God, perfect righteous Lamb of God, has been spit on, humiliated, bruised. He's beyond human recognition, and he's on the cross, nailed to the cross, and he is crying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He has asked the Father to take the cup from him earlier, but not my will, but your will be done. I'm here to do your will. But when he's on the cross, above all the things that he's thinking about me? Wow. Wow. Really? It is finished. What? Father, your punishment is finished. This cup of wrath, I've drank it all for you. Not my will, thy will be done. I'm on this cross because you wanted it. That's what kept him on the cross. But I look at these stories and I go, what is this here for? It shows me God's hand in every single part of the Bible. That he is working out his plan for his glory, to shine his sun. And when I look at it as, okay, well, maybe I go to church and my comment to church is, how do you like church today? Oh, I really didn't get much out of it, or really didn't do much for me. Really. That's why you go to church. So you can get something out of it. It's for you. Maybe down here, after, what about for God? Give him glory, give him acknowledgement. Give him your time. How about the person that's sitting next to you? How about if it's for her? Maybe you're there for her. God wants you to be his instrument of grace towards her, towards him. Maybe the pastor's having a hard time. Maybe you're there so that you can pray. Anyway, there are many things, but I think one of the things that you mentioned at the very beginning is truth, and the communication of truth is more important than anything else. It should be first. Not what I want, not what is comfortable for me, but not what tickles my ears, not what makes me feel warm and fuzzy and cuddly, but what is the truth. Jesus didn't come with this great desire to smash and insult. That wasn't his intent. He just spoke the truth. He was the truth, and he is the truth. And when he did it, it set people off. Anyway, this is just the first part. Next week, we're going back and seeing what else he does, because he does it again. And the next time he's going to do it with a little bit more, even more fervor. All right, let's pray.